the woman who mapped the ocean floor and was erased from the credit. In 1952, one woman sat alone at a desk in New York City and drew the most important map in the history of science. Not a painting, not a theory, not a guess. A precise, mathematically accurate map of something no human eye had ever seen. The floor of the Atlantic Ocean, mountains taller than the Himalayas, valleys deeper than the Grand Canyon, and running straight down the center of the Atlantic, a crack in the earth so massive, so significant, that it would permanently shatter everything geologists believed about how this planet actually works. Her colleague looked at her finished work and threw it in the trash, called it girl talk. Her name was quietly removed from every major publication. The discovery, her discovery, was handed to the men standing next to her. But here is what they could never take away. The map was right. The map changed the world. And the woman who drew it died in 2006 with almost nobody knowing her name. Her name was Marie Tharp. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you will never look at the ground beneath your feet the same way again. But before I tell you the full story, if you are new here, welcome to the Unreported Century. This is the channel where we dig through sealed archives, forgotten records, and buried history to find the people and events that powerful institutions spent decades making sure you never knew about. If that is the kind of truth you have been looking for, hit subscribe right now and turn on the notification bell. Because these are exactly the kind of stories that do not stay up forever. Now, let us go back to the beginning. The year is 1920. Marie Tharp is born in Ypsilanti, Michigan, to a father who worked for the United States Department of Agriculture as a soil surveyor. Now that detail matters more than it might seem right now. Because while other little girls in 1920s America were being steered toward home economics, secretarial work, and domestic life, Marie Tharp was riding around the American countryside with her father, watching him survey and map the land beneath their feet. She learned early that the world had a shape, and that understanding that shape required patience, precision, and an obsession with detail that most people simply do not have. She was good at all three. She studied English literature at Ohio University, then music at the University of Michigan, then, in one of those quietly historic decisions that changed the course of science, she enrolled in the University of Michigan's geology program. And here is where you need to understand the world Marie Tharp was walking into. The year was 1943. The Second World War had pulled millions of American men off university campuses and into military service. Geology departments, desperate to keep their programs running, began accepting women for the first time. Not because they believed women belonged there, because the men were gone. Marie Tharp knew exactly why she was being let through that door. She enrolled anyway. She completed not one, but 2 degrees, a master's in geology and a second degree in mathematics. That mathematics degree would become the most important weapon she ever carried. In 1948, she moved to New York City and applied for a position at the Lamont Geological Observatory at Columbia University. She was hired, but not to lead research, not to design experiments, not to sail on the research ships that would collect the data her work depended on. She was hired to do calculations, to sit at a desk and process the numbers that male scientists brought back from sea. She was expected to be a human calculator, and nothing more. But Marie Tharp had not spent her childhood watching her father map the American countryside just to spend her life adding up numbers for someone else. She had a question that nobody, in the entire history of human science, had ever seriously tried to answer. What does the bottom of the ocean actually look like? And why had nobody tried to find out? In 1948, the ocean floor was one of the last great mysteries on the surface of this planet. Think about what that means. 70% of the Earth is covered by ocean. And in 1948, with nuclear technology already in existence, with jet aircraft already crossing continents, humanity had almost no idea what lay beneath the surface of the water that covered most of the world. The dominant scientific assumption, held by some of the most educated, most celebrated scientists alive, was that the ocean floor was flat, featureless. A vast, empty, muddy plain stretching from continent to continent with nothing remarkable about it whatsoever. No mountains, no valleys, no drama, just mud. Marie Tharp did not accept assumptions. She began working with sonar data, depth measurements collected by research ships crossing the Atlantic Ocean. The ships sent sound pulses down through the water column, measured how long the echo took to bounce back, and recorded the depth at that specific point. Thousands and thousands of these measurements, column after column of numbers filling page after page of paper. To most people, this data was meaningless, numbers on a page. To Marie Tharp, it was a map waiting to be born. She began plotting depth profiles, taking the sonar readings from each ship crossing and translating them into visual cross-sections, precise slices of what the ocean floor looked like at that particular line. The work was painstaking. It required extraordinary precision, even more extraordinary patience. She worked at her desk every single day, while the male scientists sailed. And slowly, line by line, column by column, cross-section by cross-section, something began to emerge from the data that stopped her cold. A mountain range, running straight down the center of the Atlantic Ocean from north to south, a range so massive it dwarfed every mountain range on the surface of the Earth. Mountains rising 3 kilometers from the ocean floor, taller than the Alps, longer than any range on any continent. Nobody had mapped it like this before. Nobody had seen it like this before. But that, as extraordinary as it was not even the discovery. Because when Marie Tharp drew her profiles carefully enough, when she was precise enough, patient enough, brilliant enough, she found something sitting right in the center of that mountain range. A valley, a rift valley, a long, deep, narrow trench running straight down the spine of the mountain range, kilometer after kilometer, from the far North Atlantic all the way to the south. She stared at it. She checked her calculations. Then she checked them again. Because she knew, immediately, with the certainty of someone who understood exactly what they were looking at, what that valley meant. A rift valley is the kind of geological feature that forms when two sections of the Earth's crust are being pulled apart. When the ground is literally splitting open, Marie Tharp had just drawn the proof of continental drift, the most controversial, most ridiculed theory in the history of geology. The idea that the continents themselves move, that they were once joined together, that the Atlantic Ocean was created by two landmasses slowly tearing apart over hundreds of millions of years. The scientific establishment had been laughing at continental drift for 40 years, and Marie Tharp had just proven, sitting alone at a desk in New York while the men sailed without her, that it was real. She rolled up her maps and walked across the office to show Bruce Heason. What happened next is one of the most infuriating moments in the history of science, and you need to hear every detail of it. Bruce Heason was one of the most respected oceanographers in America. Brilliant, well-connected. The kind of scientist whose name opened institutional doors and whose opinion shaped careers and research funding. He was also, it must be said, the person whose name would eventually appear on top of Marie Tharp's most important work. When she laid her maps out before him and walked him carefully through what the data was showing, the mountain range, the rift valley, the proof of continental drift sitting right in the numbers she had spent months processing, Heason looked at her work and dismissed it entirely. His exact words, according to Marie Tharp herself in later interviews, were that her interpretation was, and I need you to hear this clearly, girl talk. Girl talk. Take a moment with that. A scientifically trained woman, 2 advanced university degrees, years of painstaking work processing thousands of sonar measurements with mathematical precision. Girl talk. Heason was not alone in his thinking. The entire scientific establishment of the early 1950s was deeply resistant to continental drift. Alfred Wegener, the German scientist who had first proposed the theory in 1912, had died in 1930, still largely ridiculed by his colleagues. The idea that the continents moved felt unscientific, felt like imagination, felt like exactly the kind of thing a woman alone at a desk might come up with when left with too many numbers and not enough supervision. But Marie Tharp did not throw away her maps. She went back to her desk and she kept working. Now here is something you need to fully understand about the world she was operating in. Marie Tharp was not allowed on the research ships. This was not personal preference, not a scheduling issue. The United States Navy, which funded much of the oceanographic research at Columbia University, maintained an active superstition that women aboard research vessels brought bad luck. And so while Bruce Heason and his male colleagues sailed the Atlantic, collecting the sonar data that Marie Tharp would spend months processing, mapping, and understanding, she stayed in New York, at her desk, alone, doing the intellectual work that the entire expedition program existed to enable. And when the results of that work were published, when the discoveries were formally announced to the scientific world, Marie Tharp's name was missing. Not listed as a researcher, not listed as a scientist, Not listed as the person who had identified the Rift Valley, understood its significance, and connected it to one of the most important geological theories ever proposed. She was listed as a technical assistant, in publication after publication, in year after year of work that built directly on her maps, her calculations, her insight. The name at the top of those papers was Bruce Heezen. There is a particular kind of quiet violence in watching someone receive recognition for your ideas, while you sit in the same building and continue producing the work they are being celebrated for. Marie Tharp sat in that building, and she continued producing the work, because she understood something that the entire institutional machinery around her did not. She understood that being right, provably, mathematically, scientifically, undeniably right, was the only currency that ultimately could not be stolen. And she was about to be proven right in the most dramatic way possible. So what finally forced the scientific world to admit what Marie Tharp had known for years? The proof came in 1953, and it came from earthquakes. A researcher working with seismic data began mapping the locations of earthquake activity across the floor of the Atlantic Ocean. And when those earthquake locations were plotted on a map, they formed a line, a perfect, unbroken line, running straight down the center of the Atlantic Ocean. Exactly where Marie Tharp had drawn her Rift Valley. Exactly. The match between her hand-drawn map and the global seismic data was not approximate. It was not close. It was not a reasonable correlation that required some interpretation. It was perfect. When Bruce Heezen saw the earthquake data laid over Marie Tharp's map, he went quiet. The Rift Valley was real. Continental drift was real. And Marie Tharp, dismissed, condescended to, erased from the publications, barred from the ships, told her discovery was girl talk, had been right every single day. From the very first moment she looked at that data and understood what it was showing. To his credit, Heezen became one of the most passionate advocates for both the ocean floor maps and for continental drift theory in the years that followed. The two of them continued working together, and the maps they produced grew from the Atlantic to cover the floors of every ocean on Earth. But the institutional machinery of academic credit had already done its quiet, careful work. The maps were published. They were celebrated. In 1977, 25 years after Marie Tharp first drew the Rift Valley that proved everything, National Geographic published a stunning full-color visual version of the world ocean floor map. It was seen by millions of people. It was called one of the greatest cartographic achievements of the 20th century, and the scientist most associated with it in the public record was Bruce Heezen, who died in 1977, the same year the National Geographic map was published, without the full record of who had done the foundational work ever being publicly corrected. Marie Tharp continued working. She kept mapping. She kept pushing. She spent decades expanding, refining, and publishing work that transformed humanity's understanding of this planet. In 1997, 45 years after she first drew the Rift Valley at her New York desk, the Library of Congress finally named Marie Tharp one of the 4 greatest cartographers of the 20th century. She was 73 years old. She received the recognition with the same quiet composure with which she had endured everything that came before it. She had always known she was right. She had simply been waiting, with extraordinary patience and extraordinary discipline, for the world to catch up. But here is the question I cannot stop thinking about, and I think once I ask it, you will not be able to stop thinking about it either. Marie Tharp died on August 23, 2006 in Nyack, New York. She was 86 years old. In the years before her death, she gave interviews. She spoke about her maps with clarity and quiet pride. She spoke about the dismissals and the erasures with something that was not quite bitterness and not quite forgiveness, something closer to the calm detachment of a person who had long since made peace with the gap between what the world owed her and what it actually gave. She said once, and I want you to really sit with these words, "I was so busy making maps, I did not have time to think about whether I was being treated fairly." Read that sentence again. A woman so certain of the importance of her work, so completely committed to the truth she was uncovering, that the injustice being done to her in real time was almost secondary. Almost. She knew what she had. She knew what the maps meant. She knew that the Rift Valley she had drawn at her New York desk, while the men sailed the ocean without her, was the crack in the earth that explained everything. Why earthquakes happen where they happen, why volcanoes line up the way they line up, why the continents are the shapes they are, why the ocean is the size it is. She drew the bones of this planet. with a technical pen at a desk, alone, while people told her it was girl talk. And somewhere at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean right now, 2 kilometers below the surface, running for 10,000 miles from Iceland all the way to Antarctica, there is a rift valley. Dark, cold, enormous, older than human memory. Marie Tharp drew it first, before anyone believed her, before anyone gave her credit. Before the world was ready to admit that the most important map of the 20th century was drawn by a woman at a desk who was not even allowed on the ships. Now I want to leave you with one final question. How many other Marie Tharps are out there, right now, today, sitting in an archive somewhere, buried in a footnote, listed as a technical assistant in the publication of a discovery they actually made, quietly removed from the record before you ever had the chance to read their name? How many stories like this one are sitting in a folder somewhere, waiting for someone to open it? That is the question this channel exists to answer. Every single week we open another file. Every single week we find another name. Every single week we bring back a story that somebody, somewhere, spent a very long time trying to make sure you never heard. If you are not subscribed yet, do it right now, because next week we are opening another file. And I promise you, you will not see it coming. This has been the unreported century. The history they buried, the stories they burned, we will keep finding them.